I am Rachel Miller, 28 years old, and I arrived at my sister's wedding already braced for the familiar ache of being the afterthought. The ballroom glowed with chandeliers and white roses, a place designed to impress. Yet I was seated near a fire exit where the draft slipped under the door and settled into my bones. My glass remained empty as waiters floated past with champagne, and the laughter around me felt like a celebration I was permitted to witness, but not join. My mother's pearls gleamed whenever she looked at Emily, my sister, radiant in lace and confidence, while I folded my hands in my lap and practiced the quiet endurance she called grace, and I called survival. Daniel, my fiancé, took the chair beside me, even though his name was not on the seating chart, his presence a small shield against the glances that slid past me as if I were part of the decor. I tried to smile for him, but the room pressed in, heavy with the unspoken message I had learned by heart. You don't belong here. Emily moved through the crowd as if the space had been built for her alone, every bead on her gown catching the light, every guest leaning in, captivated by her ease. Jason, her groom, looked perfect at a distance, tall and polished, the image of a future everyone wanted to believe in. Up close, something felt off. He smiled too quickly, checked his phone too often, and scanned the exits with a vigilance that did not match the joy of the night. Daniel noticed it too. He leaned close, his voice steady and low, and told me to ignore the small humiliations because something else mattered more. I followed his gaze to Jason and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the draft. The orchestra swelled and toasts began, glasses lifted high, and my mother glowed with pride at the head table, while I remained seated, invisible. In that stillness, memories pressed forward, uninvited and sharp. I was 10 again, sitting on a park bench with cupcakes melting in the sun, waiting for friends who never came because my parents had taken Emily to ballet rehearsal and forgotten me. I was older, crossing a graduation stage and scanning the crowd for familiar faces that were not there. I was 19, holding a pen with trembling fingers as my parents asked me to sign over the small inheritance my grandmother left me so Emily could buy a car for her modeling shoots. Each moment braided into the present, teaching me that in my family, I was not simply overlooked, I was expendable. Back in the ballroom, Daniel's hand covered mine, grounding me as the noise rose and fell. His eyes never left Jason. When his phone vibrated beneath the table, he glanced at the screen and slipped it away with a practiced calm that made my pulse jump. The word I glimpsed there, target, lodged in my chest like a stone. I wanted to ask questions, to demand explanations, but years of learning when silence was safer held me still. Jason excused himself and disappeared into a side corridor, phone pressed to his ear, his smile gone the moment he thought no one was watching. Emily laughed among her friends, blissfully unaware, while my parents basked in the glow of legacy and pride. Daniel told me to stay where I was, his voice carrying an authority I had not heard before, and I obeyed, fear threading through my humiliation. The room continued to glitter, candles lit, applause rising, yet the air felt brittle, as if one wrong breath could shatter everything. When Jason's eyes met mine from the corridor, recognition flashed there, cold and assessing, and I knew Daniel was right. This was not just another night where I would be forgotten. It was the opening act of something dangerous, something that would test every lie my family had wrapped itself in. I sat perfectly still, heart hammering, the draft from the exit no longer the coldest thing in the room, and understood that whatever came next would change all of us, whether we were ready or not. Daniel's hand stayed over mine, as if he could keep my pulse from spilling into the room. The ballroom looked unreal in its wealth, every mirrored wall and crystal glass reflecting 1,000 small lights. But my attention kept snagging on the shadows at the edges. The corridor where Jason had vanished, the fire exit behind us, the places a person watched when they expected trouble. I tried to focus on Emily, on the way she tilted her head as she laughed. So much like our mother, it made my stomach turn. All my life, people had said Emily was our mother's image, her pride, her proof. No one ever said who I resembled, as if my existence was a clerical error the family tolerated but never claimed. A friend from college, Samantha Brooks, slipped over and crouched beside me, her voice soft, her eyes sharp with concern. She asked if I was all right, and I lied the way I always had, smoothing my expression into something neutral. I told her to go dance, to enjoy the night, and she lingered just long enough to make me feel guilty for pushing her away, before she melted back into the crowd. I watched her go and wondered, not for the first time, what it would feel like to be the kind of person people instinctively gathered around, the kind of person the room made space for. Jason returned from the corridor as if he had never left, his smile polished back into place, his tuxedo flawless, his arms sliding around Emily's waist with practiced ease. Yet now that Daniel had planted suspicion in me, I saw what I had missed before. The smile did not reach Jason's eyes. His laughter arrived a fraction late. His fingers never truly relaxed around his phone. Even during congratulations, he held himself like someone balancing on a narrow ledge, waiting for the wrong gust of wind. When the crowd roared for another toast, Jason lifted his glass and played the part, but his gaze kept flicking to the exits as if he were counting steps, measuring time. I leaned toward Daniel and told him we should warn my parents, even though the idea tasted like ash. Part of me still carried that old, desperate reflex to prove I belonged by protecting the family, even when they did not protect me. Daniel tightened his grip, a quiet refusal. He told me they would not believe me, that they would hear jealousy in my voice because they had trained themselves to hear it. The truth hit me with a sick kind of clarity. Every time I had tried to point out danger in Emily's world, it had been twisted into envy. When she dated boys who treated her badly, I was bitter. When she bragged about friends who used her, I was trying to steal her joy. When she introduced Jason less than a year ago and I asked careful questions about his past, she smiled like a queen and told everyone I couldn't stand to see her happy. My mother had nodded along, pearls shining, as if my concern was a stain she needed to wipe away. Daniel's voice dropped even lower, and this time there was steel beneath it. Jason Langford wasn't a businessman. He had been on Daniel's radar for over 2 years. I stared at him, the words refusing to fit into the wedding scene around us. 2 years meant investigation, files, evidence, a shadow story running beneath everything my family had been celebrating. Daniel told me Jason was tied to international warrants, fraud, smuggling, and arms trafficking. The last words made my lungs lock. Arms trafficking did not belong in a ballroom filled with roses and champagne, did not belong beside my sister's lace and our mother's proud tears. And yet, Daniel said it with the calm certainty of someone stating the weather. My eyes found Emily across the room. She looked luminous, untouched, smiling as if her life were finally the story she had always believed she deserved. I felt a strange grief, not just for her, but for the years of worship my parents had poured into her like oil, making her shine so brightly she could not see her own blind spots. Daniel told me tonight was about confirmation, that Jason believed marrying into a respected Boston family would shield him, would wrap him in legitimacy and social ties. It wouldn't. Daniel said it like a promise. The room swelled with applause as Robert Langford, Jason's father, rose to speak. He had the kind of voice that belonged behind microphones, steady and commanding. He praised legacy, the joining of families, the honor of welcoming Emily into their circle. My mother sat straighter, glowing as if the speech crowned her personally. At one point, she caught my eye from across the room and gave me a small, sharp smile that did not hold affection. It held triumph. It said, Emily is everything you could never be, and tonight, the world is watching her, not you. I kept my face still as whispers drifted near my table. Fragments carried on laughter and champagne. People wondered why I was so far back, whether I had been seated wrong, whether I was even meant to be there. The humiliation should have cut deeper, but it felt distant now, drowned beneath the heavier terror of what Daniel had told me. I stared at my empty glass and thought about how easy it was for people to focus on the wrong details when the real danger stood 10 steps away, wearing a tuxedo. The microphone traveled, passing through manicured hands, collecting compliments like confetti. The string quartet played softly, the room glowing in candlelight, as if the night were safe and sealed. Then, the microphone reached our table. Someone offered it to Daniel with a cheerful expectation, as if he might deliver a sentimental line about love and family. Daniel rose. The scrape of his chair against the floor sounded too loud, too final. He stood straight, composed, his face unreadable. My heart pounded so hard I felt it in my throat. Before he spoke, Daniel's hand slipped into his jacket. For a brief second, he tilted it open enough for me to see what rested against his chest. A leather badge holder, a gleam of gold, letters that burned into my vision. FBI. The room did not react. No one else saw it, but the world inside me shifted. Every late-night call, every hushed conversation, every careful refusal to explain snapping into place. Daniel was not just secretive. He was built for secrets. He closed his jacket calmly and looked out across the ballroom. His gaze locked on Jason. My skin prickled. I realized with a sick certainty that the role I had played all my life, the quiet sister tucked away, had placed me at the edge of the blast radius. I had been seated near an exit, forgotten and ignored, and yet that very invisibility might be what kept me alive if things went wrong. Daniel's voice cut through the music like a blade. He said Jason Langford's name, clear and steady, loud enough for the nearest tables to turn. The ballroom's chatter faltered, a ripple of confusion spreading as people noticed something was happening that did not fit the script. Jason's smile held for a heartbeat longer than it should have, then tightened. His eyes snapped toward Daniel, sharp and aware, as if he had been waiting for this moment without knowing the exact shape it would take. Daniel spoke again, and the words that followed seemed to freeze the air. He announced that Jason was under arrest. The orchestra stopped mid-note. A woman gasped. A glass slipped and shattered against marble. For a fraction of a second, the entire room held its breath, suspended between disbelief and panic, while my sister stood in the center of it all, still smiling, not yet understanding that her perfect wedding had just become a crime scene. The silence shattered all at once. Gasps tore through the ballroom, chairs scraped, someone screamed, and the glittering night collapsed into noise and motion. Jason's smile vanished, his champagne flute tilting as his eyes darted from Daniel to the doors and back again. The side doors burst open and agents surged in, dark suits and raised weapons cutting through silk gowns and tuxedos like a nightmare tearing through a dream. Commands echoed, sharp and authoritative, ordering everyone to step back, to keep hands visible, to clear the area. The orchestra froze, bows suspended, as if time itself had stumbled. Jason's hand dropped beneath his jacket. The glint of metal caught the light, and my breath vanished. A gun did not belong here, not among roses and candles and the careful choreography of a society wedding. Emily screamed his name and lurched forward, her veil trailing as her bouquet slipped from her grasp. Daniel stepped between us, his body a wall, his voice calm and unyielding as he ordered Jason to drop the weapon. The room erupted into panic. Guests bolted for exits, tables overturned, crystal shattered, champagne flooding the floor. A shot cracked the air, and mirrors exploded into glittering rain. People dove beneath tables, crawled, clutched children, trampled flowers that moments earlier had symbolized perfection. Emily stumbled and fell. Her white gown spread across the floor like a broken wing as she collapsed, stunned, her joy extinguished in an instant. My mother's scream cut through everything, raw and animal, as she dropped beside her daughter. Pearls snapped and scattered across the carpet, rolling like small white lies finally released. My father stood rigid, mouth opening and closing, sound failing him as the world he had curated disintegrated in front of his eyes. Jason fired again, wild now, backing toward a service corridor as agents closed in with practiced precision. Sparks flew from a chandelier chain and the lights flickered, the room trembling under the stampede of fear. Daniel kept me pressed against the wall, his hand firm on my arm, telling me to stay down, to stay with him. A waiter stumbled past, jacket streaked with blood from a cut, his tray crushed underfoot. Another shot rang out, shattering a vase and spilling crimson roses across the floor like blood. Agents advanced, voices steady despite the chaos, boxing Jason in inch by inch. He looked cornered, sweat slicking his forehead, the groom's polish gone, replaced by something feral and desperate. Jason lunged for the corridor. The crowd screamed again as he shoved a table aside and disappeared into the shadows. The pursuit thundered after him, boots pounding, commands echoing into the hallway. The ballroom he left behind was no longer a place of celebration. It was a wreckage of broken glass, toppled chairs, sobbing guests, and a bride crumpled on the floor, while her parents clung to her, stunned and exposed. Sirens wailed outside, growing louder, red and blue light bleeding through the tall windows as cameras gathered like vultures. It did not take long. Jason reappeared in the lobby, dragged by agents, wrists cuffed, tuxedo torn, hair disheveled, shouting denials that bounced uselessly off the walls. His gun was gone. His power was gone. Flashing cameras erupted as news crews pressed forward, the spectacle feeding on itself. Inside, an agent announced the charges with clinical clarity: money laundering, international arms trafficking, conspiracy. The investigation had been ongoing for years. Each word landed like a blow. Whispers rippled through the remaining guests, prayers and curses tangled together. Robert Langford's face was ashen. He stood apart, jaw set, humiliation burning through the polish. He declared the marriage finished, severed all ties, and turned away without looking back. My mother's sob turned into a howl. Emily shook, trying to rise and failing, the weight of the night pinning her down. My father's shoulders slumped, as if the pride he had worn like armor had finally crushed him. Around us, people whispered that the Millers were ruined, that no one respectable would ever invite them again. The judgments lashed and burned, but for the first time, I did not flinch. The room emptied slowly. Staff moved through the wreckage, sweeping glass, collecting abandoned shoes, closing instrument cases like coffins. Emily sat staring at a single loose thread on her gown, tugging at it until it snapped. My mother brushed a pearl from Emily's palm and stared at it as if it were a strange seed that would never grow. My father hovered, rubbing his temples, unable to meet my eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked as he admitted he thought he was protecting the family. He could not finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. The silence held it. An agent took our statements. Daniel answered with professional calm. I added what I had seen and heard, the word that had cut through the music earlier, shipment, and felt the weight of truth settle into ink. Outside, dawn crept toward the city and headlines multiplied. Inside, something quieter happened. My mother looked at me, not with pride or pity, but recognition. She swallowed, nodded once, and looked away. It was not an apology. It was the shape of one. We stepped into the cold morning air. Sirens had stilled. The hotel behind us carried the story forward without me. Daniel took my hand, steady and warm. Not a hero's rescue, but a partner's presence. For the first time, I did not feel the urge to convince anyone of my worth. The truth had spoken for itself, loudly, publicly, and it had rearranged everything. I lifted my face to the clean light and felt lighter. Not because the past was erased, but because it had finally been named. We did not sleep. The hours after the arrest blurred into a strange quiet that followed the storm, the kind that leaves your ears ringing even after the noise is gone. Hotel staff worked with careful efficiency, moving around the ballroom as if it were a crime scene and a funeral at once, sweeping glass, blotting champagne from the carpet, righting chairs that no longer mattered. The chandeliers stopped swaying, their light now flat and unforgiving. Emily was cleared by paramedics and allowed to leave with family. She moved as if underwater, wrapped in a borrowed coat, her veil gone, her hair pinned back with a practicality that felt like grief. My mother hovered close, murmuring fragments that never formed full sentences. My father stood half a step behind them, shoulders bowed, carrying bags he had not packed, the posture of a man who had lost the map he trusted. In the lobby, reporters pressed against the line of agents who refused them entry. Camera flashes sparked with every movement. Someone slid an early edition across the concierge desk, the headline bold and merciless, naming the place and the crime in a single breath. I did not look away. I wanted the truth fixed in ink, undeniable, something my family could not edit or smooth over. Daniel returned from speaking with a supervisor and sat beside me, tired but steady. He did not offer platitudes. He placed his hand over mine and let the quiet do its work. When my mother finally turned to me, it was without drama. Her voice was rough, stripped of performance. She said she saw it now, the years, the way we should have listened. The words landed softly, not absolution, not repair, but an opening. I nodded once and did not ask for more. Seeds need quiet to root, and I had learned that pressing too hard can kill what might grow. We left as the sky paled. The city woke in bands of light. On the sidewalk, a passerby paused at a newspaper stand, read the headline, shook his head, and walked on. To him, it was a scandal. To us, it was a reckoning. Back in our room, Daniel loosened his tie and sat on the edge of the bed. I stood at the window, palms against cool glass, watching the street breathe back to life. In the reflection, I saw us clearly for the first time. A woman who had spent years learning to be quiet, and a man who had learned when silence mattered, and when it must break. We checked out after sunrise. The lobby was calmer, though the air still hummed with aftermath. A crushed rose clung to the sole of a shoe near the revolving doors. Emily did not meet my eyes, but as the driver opened the car, she paused and touched my sleeve with a tremor of pressure that said more than words could. I squeezed her fingers and let them go. Some bridges are not rebuilt in a day. Some begin with a look, a pause, a hand briefly held. Daniel and I stepped onto the sidewalk. The air smelled like coffee and wet stone. He laced his fingers with mine, a simple gesture that had carried me across more nights than I could count. I did not need to raise my voice or gather witnesses. The truth had stood in the center of a ballroom and spoken for itself. For the first time, I did not feel compelled to explain who I was. I felt steady in my own shape. As we walked, I thought about the rooms like that ballroom, the ones dressed up to hide what they cannot contain, and the people tucked at the far tables who learn to watch instead of perform. I thought about how invisibility can be a wound, but it can also become a vantage point. When you are not the focus, you see the seams, the exits, the tells that others miss. You hear the words that do not belong. You notice when smiles arrive late and hands never relax. Justice does not always roar. Sometimes it waits, patient and precise, until the moment it must be heard. And family loyalty, I learned, is not proven by silence or sacrifice alone. It is tested by whether truth is allowed to breathe, even when it threatens the picture everyone wants to frame and hang. We reached the corner as sunlight found the upper windows of the hotel and set them alight. The light was clean, indifferent to last night's performance. It warmed my face, and I lifted my chin to meet it. The weight I had carried for years felt different now, not gone, but rearranged. Truth does that. It does not erase. It changes the way the pieces sit. Later, over coffee and the first deep breath in hours, I thought about the stories people would tell themselves about what happened. Some would pity the bride, some would blame the family, some would accuse the quiet sister of complicity. They would be partially right and entirely wrong. Families are messy, so is justice. What matters is who stands up when it counts, and who listens when the quiet voice refuses to vanish. If you have ever been seated at the far table, edited out of the photo, taught to mistake endurance for love, know this. Silence can keep you safe, but truth will set you free when the time is right. And when it does, you do not have to shout. You only have to refuse to look away. The days that followed unfolded with a strange, relentless clarity. News cycles moved on quickly, but the consequences did not. Lawyers spoke in measured tones. Friends chose sides or chose distance. Invitations evaporated. My parents' house grew quieter, stripped of the easy confidence that had once filled it. Emily stayed with them for a while, moving through rooms like a guest in her own life, learning the weight of a future that had collapsed in public view. She did not ask me to fix anything, and for the first time, that felt like respect. I returned to work and found that the city did not care about our family drama. Deadlines remained. Meetings began on time. Coffee tasted the same. There was a relief in that ordinariness, a reminder that my worth had never been measured by my last name or my seat at a table. Daniel resumed his schedule with the quiet intensity it had always carried, now stripped of the secrecy that had once unsettled me. We spoke plainly. We chose honesty over comfort. It was not always easy, but it was solid, and solidity mattered more than sparkle. One afternoon, my mother called and asked if we could talk. Not perform, not argue, just talk. We sat across from each other, the space between us filled with years we could not rewrite. She did not ask me to forget. She did not ask me to pretend. She said she had mistaken control for protection and silence for loyalty. She said she was learning the difference. I listened. Listening did not erase the past, but it made room for a future that did not require me to disappear to keep the peace. My father found his voice in fragments. He apologized without ceremony. He admitted fear where he had once offered judgment. It was not dramatic, but it was real. Emily and I spoke carefully, circling the truth without weaponizing it. She did not ask me why I hadn't shouted louder. I did not ask her why she hadn't listened sooner. We acknowledged the pattern and let that acknowledgement be enough for now. I thought often about that night, about how easily beauty and confidence can blind people who want to believe. I thought about how danger wears expensive suits, and how truth sometimes needs an ally willing to stand in the open. I thought about the quiet power of being observant when others are busy performing. Invisibility had trained me to see. That skill had finally mattered. What stayed with me most was the lesson I had resisted for years. Love that demands your silence is not love, and loyalty that requires your erasure is not loyalty. You can be compassionate without being consumed. You can be patient without surrendering your voice. And you can tell the truth without revenge, without spectacle, simply by refusing to look away when the moment arrives. If you are the one at the far table, know this: your perspective is not small. It is wide. You see what others miss. Trust that. Hold it until the right time. And when the truth asks you to stand, stand with steadiness. You do not owe anyone a performance. You owe yourself honesty. If this story resonated with you, if you have ever been the quiet one, learning to choose yourself, Please like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this. And tell me in the comments what you would have done in that room.